now that we have the piping done, actually for me it's being done right now. My mom is sewing the piping, so you might hear the hum of the sewing machine in the background, which that's a great tip. If you have friends or family who can help you with this project, maybe you both have something you want to slip cover, it definitely goes a lot faster if you can have somebody working on the piping or maybe ironing the fabric while you're doing another part of it. So now we're going to get the body of the slip cover on the chair. So for now we're going to take away any cushions that are on the chair or the furniture so that we're just working with the main piece of the furniture. You could slip cover a piece with the cushions on it. It just isn't going to look quite as sharp. So I definitely recommend slip covering the cushions separate. It's going to stay put a lot better. It's just going to look much better. If you're going to take the time to do it, just do it right. So I need to figure out how much fabric we need for the whole chair. And so in order to do that, I'm going to use the chair as my model. I don't need to measure the chair and then transfer the measurements over to the fabric. I'm just going to drape the fabric over the chair and cut it approximately so that I make sure I have all of the pieces that are just right. So I'm going to start with the back here since that's one of the largest pieces of fabric. And since I'm working with old hemp sheets, there actually are seams and even some stains that I need to sort of work around. So I'm making sure that I do that. And this back piece is pretty important. If you're using a fabric with a pattern, you want to make sure that this back piece looks really good because this is going to be the most noticeable. And I'm sort of tucking it in place, making sure I have plenty of seam allowance, maybe 1 to 2 inches, just in case. It stinks if you start working on this and you've cut the fabric too short. So these cuts don't have to be precise. You just want to make sure that you're generous with the amount of fabric that you leave yourself. These are just some really long quilter's pins, and I use these to hold the pieces of fabric in place that I've been cutting. This is really helpful so you can actually see how the pieces fit together and make sure that they're big enough and make sure that the pieces are sort of cut at least approximately to the right size. This is going to help you out a lot when you get to the stage where you're pinning and starting to then sew the pieces together. So now we're on the back, and for the back, if we make this one solid piece of fabric on a slipcover that's really fitted, we're not going to be able to get it on and off, especially with a wing chair. If this had just a straight back, that'd be a different story. But with a wing chair, we need to put 2 pieces of fabric onto the back so that we're able to open it up to get it on and off when we want to wash it. So I'm going to take a piece of fabric, and I'm gonna do a little bit more than half. I do like to have a little bit of an overlap. It's nice if you can really spread out while you're doing this, because you'll be working with pretty large pieces of fabric. I made a little mark with my finger here, just pinching the fabric, and I'm just gonna start cutting. So I need to cut down, here's the bottom of the chair, I need to cut down to about there. And one tip is when you're working on a chair, well, most chairs are symmetrical, and you cut the fabric for one side, you can actually just take those pieces of fabric one at a time and use those as a template. So especially if a piece of fabric's sort of really tricky to fit, that'll make it a little bit easier. You only have to fit it one time, cut it, and then use that as a template. Okay, so there's 1/2, and as you can see, it's a little bit more than half, because we do want to have a little bit of overlap, or a few inches of overlap. And then I'm going to cut another piece for the other side. And if you're working with a fabric like mine that has finished edges, it just has finished edges because it's an antique sheet. So the way it was loomed, it has edges that aren't going to fray at all. That can also be the case with a drop cloth that has hemmed edges. Definitely use that to your advantage. It'll save you some sewing if you can use ends that are already hemmed. So I'm making sure that as I'm cutting out the fabric that I'm using those finished edges to my advantage. So I'm going to put the finished edges towards the inside, and that saves me from having to hem it. So this is a finished edge, and then I'm going to put ties on this to hold it closed, but we'll do that at the end. So this would be a fabric that I'd want to pin into place. So you can start to see the slipcover take shape even before we've done any pinning or sewing on the slipcover. And I want to talk about this piece of fabric for just a minute. This is called the decking, and this is going to be underneath the cushion. So I did not use my nice fabric for it. I used just a scrap of some sort of, it's kind of some kind of woven fabric that I had in my stash. But you can use canvas for this as well. But I don't need it to be a nice piece of fabric, so I'm going to use this less expensive one since the cushion will be covering. And now it's time to start pin fitting the slipcover.